There'll be no more tears. Well, this myself, company of greater men than you and me, up to a point, but not in every way. Much different. But if he were heterosexual, he would have probably not gotten this done. Well, it is what it is, 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 what it is. I would sack them like cities. Take just one paragraph from this man's writing and see the brilliance, the majesty of his thinking. Concerning the condition of inmates, as you might say, within the territories controlled by the Hôpital Général and its franchises, which grew out of it all over France within 20 years, starting in Paris. The condition that they were in, the invalids there, first a description of them. I saw them naked and covered in rags with nothing but straw to protect themselves from the damp cold of the stones on which they lay. I saw them badly fed and deprived of fresh air, and flesh, to breathe and water to quench their thirst, lacking even the basic necessities of life. They were in the charge of jailers and entirely at the mercy of their brutish ways. I saw them in cramped, dirty places, deprived of air and light, locked up in dens where men would hesitate to keep the wild animals that governments maintain at great cost in the capitals of Europe. So in conditions like that sound pretty disgusting. I think that was the point they were trying to get across, and probably degrading and undignified. Well, I was trying to talk about the conditions of life for those in the Hôpital Général in about 1656. But in fact, those conditions haven't changed for the better. They've gotten worse. While you may have some trinkets to go with your jailers, the extent of their arsenal is basically the same as was available to the director of the Hôpital Général, who was an extra-governmental entity. It says, to that end, the directors will have the following at their disposal: gallows, iron collars, prisons, and dungeons inside the Hôpital Général and dependent buildings, which they may use as they see fit, without there being any recourse to appeal against the judgments they are to promulgate inside the Hôpital. Judgments made, with reference to outside the hospital, will be carried in their due form, regardless of any defense or appeals that have been made or are pending, and without prejudice to them. No defense or appeal to any higher court will be accepted. That's a lot of authority, I say. Well, Foucault puts it another way. He says, their sovereignty was thus almost absolute. There was no right of appeal against their jurisdiction, and nothing could prevail against their right of execution. The Hôpital Général was a strange power that the king set up halfway between police and justice, at the limits of legality, and forming a third order of repression. This was the world to which the insane, whom Pinel was later to find in Bichère and Salpêtrière, belonged. The Hôpital Général bore no resemblance to any medical idea in either its purpose or functioning. It was rather an instrument of order of the new bourgeois and monarchical order that was beginning to take shape in the France of that time. It was directly connected to the power of the king, who had placed it under the authority of the civil government. The royal almonry, which had previously provided ecclesiastical and spiritual mediation in the politics of assistance, suddenly found itself sidelined. The decree stated, "It is our intention to be both the curator and protector of this Hôpital Général and of all the places that depend upon it, as a royal foundation, and nevertheless they will depend in no fashion on the Grand Almoner nor on any of our other officers. They will be totally exempt from the superiority, visit, and jurisdiction of the officers of the General Reformation, or of the Grand Almonry, or of any other, to which we forbid any knowledge or jurisdiction in these matters in any way conceivable." Sounds like almost a magical spell. In other words, they're just making a provision for what they will and will not accept to occur as far as the supervision of the Hôpital Général. And basically they want it to be directly under the king's authority through his minions in the bureaucracy. So something like that does exist. And so the original conception of the MAD at that time was basically anyone that would fall under a certain jurisdiction once identified as such. And this is the jurisdiction that was set up for them. How does that sound? Well, they have, I would argue, going from Foucault's general analysis of just how this whole situation began with the definition of madness, that the original creation of these types of confinements represents the actual genuine reaction and response to certain types of figures by certain types of authorities, and it has always been the case since, and would not have been but that. That was their original nature in the first place, and it shows that in all instances where the same category is created in order to create outcasts of a certain field of human action or a type of authority in human society, that they are shoved out of the category arbitrarily as though impossible to be reformed into it except through certain channels, and then that's set up as their re-education system. But usually if you're considered profane on a religious level, you're either wiped out or tortured to death. But that's ecumenicalism is actually an aggregate form of what are taking place in churches of given cults. They're actually one cult, but with different cells. So it's not really that they're different religions in the first place. They fundamentally have the same racket going on. If anyone doesn't fit into it, they're ostracized, they're demonized, they're gaslighted, and then they're murdered. It's basically the bottom line. So is that also still going on? Is that what the treatment of the MAD in the 1600s amounted to? And is that basically the root of everything ongoing in terms of covert ostracism methodologies, which have been politicized for far lesser reasons than a mind on the outskirts of reason? And so this is a ridiculous affair if that has taken place, but it would be consistent with history. So that's Foucault's contribution to the discussion so far. And gaslighting being basically what he's writing about, the history of gaslighting. And how it began, and then how it was converted into a sort of a specialized institution of pseudo-medicine, and that he'll get into in other forms too. But also worthy of research is his treatment of authority in general in his Discipline and Punish.